General business number 1, standing in the name of Mr Paech, to move a motion concerning responding in a timely and meaningful way to coronial inquests into the death of Kumanjayi Walker.
I call the member for 𝙍𝙬𝙬.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that the Northern Territory Government, 1, acknowledges the findings and recommendations of the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjayi Walker and the impact of this tragedy on his family, the 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙆 people and the wider 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀 community. 2, commits to implementing all recommendations from the inquest in full in consultation with Aboriginal communities. And 3, establishes a community-led oversight and implementation group including Aboriginal elders, legal experts, community advocates to ensure transparency and accountability. 4, acknowledges that the Northern Territory police officers work in challenging and complex circumstances and that strengthened health and wellbeing support should be prioritised. 5, reinstates funding to the Northern Territory Police Anti-Racism Review to ensure that NT Police are properly supported to address any systemic cultural issues within the force. And 6, calls for a pilot program in 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀, co-designed with traditional owners and leaders to restructure local governance and service delivery based on kinship and cultural authority as a model for other remote communities. Madam Speaker, today I rise with a heavy heart and steadfast in resolve. We gather not just to reflect on the loss of life that was Kumanjayi Walker, but to reckon with the truths his death revealed. Truths his family and the 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀 community of 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀 have carried every day since November 9th, 2019. Kumanjayi was more than a headline. He was a grandson, a nephew, a young 𝙍𝙬𝙀 man, still finding his way in a world that not only sometimes is unfair, but is unkind to Aboriginal people. His death was tragic, but was not isolated. It was a result of systemic failures we can no longer ignore. The coronial inquest did not just deliver findings, Madam Speaker. It held up a mirror to our justice system, our policing structures, and our ability to listen to Aboriginal voices and act with courage and care. And so today, I bring forward this motion, not as symbolism, but as a call to action, because we owe Kumanjayi's family and every family who has lived through the pain of injustice more than sympathy. We owe them accountability and we owe them change. This motion calls for 6 things. First, it formally acknowledges the findings and recommendations of the inquest, the deep and ongoing impact of this tragedy on Kumanjayi's family, the 𝙍𝙬𝙀𝙀 people, and the community of 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀 who are still grieving. Madam Speaker, I remember the night we got the call, families telling us what had happened. I remember the sadness and the trauma and the shock in their voices. I remember being at the Sorry camp with the then member for Scott McConnell. I remember being at Kumanjayi's funeral in 𝙍𝙬𝙀𝙀. I only returned a few weeks ago to his grave. The heartache still there, the sadness still heavy. Secondly, this motion commits to implementing all 33 recommendations in full, not behind closed doors in Darwin, but through genuine consultation with Aboriginal communities. Reforms must be done with communities, not to them, hand in hand and on country. This needs to be the new minimal standard when making decisions about communities. It needs to be done by communities. Thirdly, it establishes a community-led oversight and implementation group, including Aboriginal elders, legal experts and trusted advocates. Rebuilding trust must begin with transparency, cultural authority and self-determination. Fourth, it recognises what is often forgotten, that NT police officers work in highly complex, demanding and often dangerous conditions. While we pursue reform, we must also strengthen support for mental health and wellbeing for those serving on the front lines. Many of my own family, Madam Speaker, work in the force as Aboriginal liaison officers, community constables and ALOs. And they have carried the weight of this tragedy every day, continuing to serve their communities through difficult, incredibly difficult times. I honour their commitment to community safety, but I also acknowledge how uncomfortable it has been for many of them, sometimes serving alongside members who don't respect them or acknowledge them and discriminate them. Fifth, this motion calls for the reinstatement of funding to the Northern Territory Police Anti-Racism Review. Madam Speaker, a critical step in confronting systemic cultural issues within the force. Cutting the review sent the wrong message. Reinstating it is not about blame. It is about ensuring our systems are fair, just and safe for everyone. Madam Speaker, I know that not everyone in the force is racist. We all acknowledge that, but we must work to identify ways systemic and institutional racism can be stepped out, because it does exist. Sixth, it proposes a bold new path, a pilot program in Yuendumu, co-designed with traditional owners, cultural leaders and representatives from the 16 skin groups from the Warlpiri Nation. A model of governance and service delivery grounded in kinship, in culture, in community. Because, Madam Speaker, the most effective solutions are community solutions. Madam Speaker, the inquest made it clear the harm caused when Aboriginal people are excluded from the systems that govern their lives. It reminded us the pain that lingers when culture is disrespected, voice is silenced and justice is denied. But, Madam Speaker, this is a moment and this is a chance to do better. This motion is not an end point. It is a foundational step, a foundation for real healing, genuine partnership and systemic and systematic change. If we are serious about truth-telling, about reconciliation and about justice, then we must be serious about acting on what the coroner has told us. Instead, Madam Speaker, the CLP government has done the opposite. Rather than engaged in a considered response, they've undermined the separation of powers, publicly criticising the coroner and the council assisting. Rather than work collaboratively, they are considering changes to the Coroner's Act, a move seemingly driven not by good policy, but by discomfort with the truths revealed. We've heard talk about the cost of the inquest, nearly $8 million. But let's be clear, that cost was necessary. Necessary to uncover the truth. Necessary to allow the community access and for people in the community to interact with that system. Necessary to prevent future deaths. Necessary to honour the life of Kumanjayi Walker. And the coroner gave us a clear, achievable path forward. The 33 recommendations are not radical. They are reasonable. They are evidence-based and they are life-saving. We've now had 2 coronial inquests provided to the government with workable recommendations. We cannot keep shelving them. We cannot keep ignoring them. We must act. Over 683 pages of testimony, lived experience, pain and truth. That's what the Walker Coronial Inquest has given us. And yet, we are still debating whether to listen. We sat on the red, sunburnt earth of Yuendumu as the final report was handed down by the Northern Territory's coroner. It was a moment of mixed emotions. Some, it was closure. And also, for some, it was deep anxiety about what would follow. For years, the Warlpiri people have carried this burden with dignity. They have remained calm, resilient, focused on justice. As the coroner began reading her findings, I saw in the faces the validation of what many had long known. Racism exists. Rolfe was a racist, and his racist attitudes were allowed to flourish. It told us that systems are repeatedly failing. The report made it clear it's time for new responses to old problems. That means building alternative first responder models, ones that put culture, care and community at the centre. Policing alone cannot address the complex social challenges we face in our community. We need mental health professionals, social workers, elders and trained mediators, peacekeepers, all on the ground, people trusted by our communities. We must invest in Aboriginal-led law and justice groups, not as side projects, but as central pillars to our justice system. These groups hold the knowledge, the trust, the solutions. The Territory Government has a chance right now to lead, to shift from reactive, crisis-driven responses to proactive, community-driven models, but that takes political will. It means resourcing communities, not just police stations and police operations. It means handing over decision-making power, not just running consultations. It means confronting the uncomfortable truths of structural failure and acting on them. Madam Speaker, Kumanjayi Walker should still be here. If we're serious about stopping more deaths in custody, we need a justice system that sees, hears and values Aboriginal lives, not treats them as afterthoughts. We need a justice system that people can see themselves in. Madam Speaker, to my knowledge, not one Aboriginal person was on the jury in the matter we are discussing. We must look at alternative ways of ensuring First Nations people are represented in all aspects of our justice system. As an Aboriginal man and as a representative of 𝙍𝙬𝙬, and as someone who deeply believes in the strength of our people, I say this to our people. The days are dark and sometimes seem endless, but I will continue walking with you through that darkness until together we can step into the light. The Warlpiri people are a proud people. They are a strong people, and I am proud to call them family. I am 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙼. But our journey is far from over. The lead up to the handing down of the final report, we lost another Warlpiri man, Kumanjayi, a relative of mine, through my kinship system. A 24-year-old man with a disability died after being restrained by off-duty police in a confectionery aisle of a Coles supermarket. That was 2 months ago, and we still do not know if charges will be laid. He died in a lolly aisle, in public, and yet still no answers. Since the Royal Commission in 1991 into Aboriginal deaths in custody, 602 Aboriginal people have died. This is not a number to gloss over. This is a national shame. It's a national disgrace. It is beyond debate that there is a problem, a systemic, structural problem. And until we are all prepared to acknowledge that, we are all complicit in allowing it to continue. We must do better. We must invest in what works. And the government must lead by accepting and implementing the coroner's recommendations, not resisting them. Madam Speaker, I want to also take time this afternoon to table a letter from the Justice for Walker campaign. And before I do so, I want to read that onto the parliamentary record. This is a letter on behalf of the family of Kumanjayi Walker and the Yingiya community, alongside 23 Aboriginal community, family violence and legal organisations, asking the 𝙍𝙖𝙑𝙖𝙑𝙖𝙑 government to publicly commit to the findings of the review and recommendation of Coroner Armitage in the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjayi Walker and engage with Aboriginal communities and the legal sector. The letter is addressed to the Chief Minister, the Attorney-General, the Health and Aboriginal Affairs Minister, the Minister for Children and Families, the Minister for Education and Training, the Minister for Seniors, Youth and Equality, and the Police Commissioner, Acting Police Commissioner Martin Dole. Dear Chief Minister, Ministers and Acting Police Commissioner, no more Aboriginal deaths at the hands of police. The time to work with Yappa is now. Madam Speaker, Yappa means Aboriginal. The family of Kumanjayi Walker and the Yingiya community, alongside 23 Aboriginal community, family violence and legal organisations, today call on the 𝙍𝙑𝙑𝙖𝙑𝙑 government to publicly commit to the findings and recommendations of Coroner Armitage in the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjayi Walker and engage with Aboriginal communities and the legal sector. Aboriginal deaths at the hands of police must stop. Aboriginal people have the solution, and now is the time to work with us to ensure that our people thrive, our children grow up safe and supported. Change is not only possible, but well overdue. Kumanjayi Walker was killed after being shot 3 times at close range by a police officer who the coroner found was a racist, had derived satisfaction from using excessive force and had not been properly disciplined or supervised by the Northern Territory Police. The coroner formally found what Aboriginal people in the NT have always known, that no one is holding the NT Police accountable when they use excessive force and hurt Aboriginal people. And there is an entrenched systemic and structural racism within the Northern Territory Police Force. Devastatingly, Kumanjayi Walker's death was found to be entirely avoidable. It is clear to the Yingiya community, as well as to the Aboriginal community and legal sectors, that there must be an independent oversight of police. We are calling for the establishment of an NT Police Ombudsman to independently investigate police misconduct, excessive use of force and systemic racism. Most importantly, a police ombudsman should have clear powers and resources to independently investigate Aboriginal deaths in custody. The coroner also made specific recommendations to the 𝙍𝙑𝙑𝙖𝙑𝙑 government to implement. Many of them involve working directly with Yingiya community representatives and the legal sector to implement community-led solutions. These include developing Aboriginal-led on-country programs, rehabilitation and diversion services for young people, resourcing culturally skilled mediators, alleviating the work of our Aboriginal community police officers, and developing an anti-racism strategy. These recommendations recognise what we have been trying to tell the government for many years, that it is only through self-governance, self-determination and full community control that Warlpiri people can begin to heal and then dream of a safer, happier future where our children flourish. Warlpiri people and all Aboriginal people want lasting change that uplifts our people and ensures a strong, healthy future for generations to come. We do not need to be fixed by others. Now is the time to genuinely listen, to clear the path for our autonomy and to provide the resources and support that will enable us to shape our own future. This is what will bring lasting solutions and restore trust. These are not only the right things to do, they are essential steps in preventing needless loss of life and build a better future for all. We are ready to work together for profound, lasting change, and we urge you to act now and act boldly. We call on the 𝙍𝙑𝙑𝙑𝙑 government to publicly commit to implementing the recommendations of the Coroner Armitage coronial inquest into the Kumanjayi Walker's death. 2, publicly commit to establishing a police ombudsman in the Northern Territory so that there is independent investigations of police misconduct and deaths in custody. To commence working and engaging with 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙬 Cultural Authority, Yuendumu Aboriginal Corporation, consisting of representatives from the 16 skin groups of Yuendumu community and from the Aboriginal community legal sectors to progress the implementation of Coroner Armitage's recommendations. Sincerely, Samara Fendez Brown, cousin to Kumanjayi Walker, Joyce Brown, Leanne Oldfield, Margaret Brown, Stephen Marshall, Ned Hargraves, Derek Williams, Robin Granitz, Carl Hampton, Rachel Hocking. In addition to the family representation as stated above, the letter is supported by organisations: the Human Rights Law Centre, the Central Australian Women's Legal Service, Justice Not Jails, Her Story Mbanthwa, First Peoples Disability Network, the Australian Child Rights Task Force, Justice Reform Initiative, Jailing is Failing, the Northern Territory Council of Social Services, the Central Australian Youth Justice, Smarter Justice for Safer Communities, Amnesty International, the Australian Childhood Foundation, Liberty Victoria, Clothing the Gaps, Liberty Victoria's Rights Advocacy Project, Children's Ground, Indigenous Allied Health Australia, Save the Children, 54 Reasons, Democracy in Colour, the 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙀𝙀 Foundation, the Walpri Project, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, Truth, Justice for Our People. Madam Speaker, I seek leave to place that letter on the parliamentary record.
Is leave granted? All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. Leave is granted.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank every individual, every family member and every community member who gave testimony, evidence and lived experience into this inquest. Your courage has moved us. Your stories have changed us. And your calls for justice shall not go unanswered, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, people may dismiss coronial inquest findings and reports. We heard yesterday the government speak about the coronial inquest into 4 amazing Aboriginal women who had lost their lives and completely discredit that coronial. Madam Speaker, like this coronial, they are people's stories. They are people's truths. They deserve to be respected, not ignored. Madam Speaker, it has nearly been 5 years since the life of Kumanjayi Walker was taken in Yuendumu. And in that time, the pain from that moment has not faded. It's pain that sits deep in the hearts of his family. The Walpri people, but also importantly, the 𝙬𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙬 people. Kumanjayi, a proud Walpri 𝙬𝙬𝙀 man. Madam Speaker, the broader community, not only of Yuendumu, but of the Northern Territory and of Australia, feel this pain. It is a pain that must be acknowledged by all of us who serve in public life. The family, the elders, the community members of Yuendumu and of our country, to all our First Nations brothers and sisters, I stand with you in your grief. I see your grief, I hear your calls for justice, and I remain committed to ensuring that this tragedy leads to meaningful change, not just words, but actions. The coroner's finding of the Walker Coronial Inquest must be a turning point. We can simply not afford to express sorrow and then go back to business as usual. The systemic failures laid bare throughout this process require a response that is bold, that is structural, and that is grounded in justice, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity before us. The coroner's inquest has given us a blueprint, a pathway to do things differently, an opportunity to make real and lasting change, an opportunity to stop people like Kumanjayi Walker and Kumanjayi dying, because the loss of life of anyone is a loss too many. I encourage members of this government to come to Yuendumu. It's a beautiful place. It is a place that, while many people talk about it in a negative way, it's much like all of our remote communities. They are places of love, of hope, of aspiration, and home to amazing people. People of such strength and resilience. And I want to acknowledge, Madam Speaker, that there are people who are not with us today, elders, who 5 years ago stood up on the lawns of the courthouse in Alice Springs demanding justice for Walker. And we need to honour them as well, our ancestors who have joined the Jukupa, who have joined the night skies and shine bright down on our communities. This government has a chance to come out there. I am the member for 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙀𝙀, and I will absolutely never ever turn away an opportunity to take one of the government ministers out to Yuendumu, to introduce you to Yapa, to let them talk to you about what we can do to change. Because this isn't just about changing the justice system, this is about changing the landscape in remote Aboriginal communities. Because if we dive down deep into all of those coronial inquests, the Kumanjayi Walker coronial inquest, the inquest into the death of those 4 amazing women, it also tells us we need to be investing in the social determinants in the Northern Territory. We need to be doing more work, yes, to build more houses, yes, to ensure that there are strong protections for our children. The safety of Territory children should always be paramount. Yes, to make sure that there are stronger and better health services in our remote communities and that our crisis systems are in fact working. We should have never allowed an entire health network to leave the community of Yuendumu, not only for that community, but for our staff. Our frontline workers were also going into that community with no health service. Our schools. We celebrated 50 years of bilingual education in Yuendumu, and we couldn't even get a single member of the CLP government out there. The Attorney General, the first law officer of the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, has not even been to a Central Australian remote Aboriginal community in 11 months. 11 months. Madam Speaker, I'm going to ask for Standing Order 43, an extension of time, if I may.
Is an extension of time granted? All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. An extension is granted.
There is a law and justice group being set up in Yuendumu. They absolutely would welcome the opportunity to meet with the Attorney General because they want to get that group up and running and to be strong. Yes, we all need to do work. no one in this parliament, not on any side of any party or any member, is resolved from a responsibility here. We all have a responsibility and we all must do better. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to also acknowledge all of the hard work, not only of the government agencies, but of our legal community, who were all involved in that coronial inquest. Counsel assisting, the Coroner's Office, the Department of Health, the Department of Attorney General and Justice, and all other relevant departments that may have been required to come and give testimony or provide submissions. Incredibly important work. I also want to acknowledge the Aboriginal Interpreter Service, who made sure that it could be put into 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙍𝙼𝙬 and 𝙬𝙑𝙬𝙍, so that when the coroner was handing down her findings, family had the opportunity after it to talk, to decompress, to get the language clear, so that there wasn't an opportunity for any barriers. Important work. And yet it did cost money. But we're talking about a territory life. And people in remote communities deserve access to justice, not just when we're talking about our courts, but when we're talking about coronial inquests, when we're talking about access to all justice services. Madam Speaker, I also want to acknowledge everyone in the Northern Territory who has come out and supported members of our community in times of crisis and in need. Because I know how much that is appreciated, particularly by the 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙍 nation, not only during the time of the loss of life for Kumanjayi Walker, but most recently, May this year, when Kumanjayi White was also taken from us. We do live in an amazing place, and I want to thank all of those people who have rallied around to support Yapa Aboriginal people in those times of need and times of crisis. It has been greatly received and greatly respected. Samara Fendes Brown has been so strong. I want to also acknowledge my family. Ned Hargraves, that's a leader. Strong, resilient, and has continually called for calm. Robin Granitz, most people from Central Australia know Robin. Robin's always there at a time of need for the 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙍 communities. I want to absolutely acknowledge Robin for his continued contributions and supports for peace, for calm, and for justice. Robin is an amazing man. I want to also acknowledge Derek Williams, who works in the Northern Territory Police Force as an officer in that amazing community of 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙍. That is leadership. He's an amazing man who always looks after his community and has worked diligently over a number of years to serve that community. Again, in closing, Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge just the resilience and strength of the 𝙍𝙬𝙈𝙀𝙍 communities and the 𝙬𝙑𝙬𝙬 communities. Papunya, Haas Bluff, Mount Liebig, all the way to Pintabee Lands, Kintor, all related to Kumanjayi Walker, all still feeling and carrying that pain. Madam Speaker, there is a long road to go, but right now we have a moment in time where we have a clear pathway. All of the recommendations designed by the coroner are designed in a manner which can allow them to be accepted, which can allow them to be delivered over a period of time if work is needed to be done to ensure that they have effective implementation and delivery. When you look at those recommendations, Madam Speaker, they are, to some, moderate. They can all be achieved and they should all be achieved. Madam Speaker, I commend this motion to the Assembly, and I think we should all reflect on where we are. And yes, there are matters that require us to work with the Commonwealth, and we should. Because the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, since 1991, 602 Aboriginal people have died in custody. I am calling for a review of the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. We need a health check. We need to look at what was accepted, what hasn't been accepted, what was implemented but is not working and needs to be fixed, because we need to do better. We owe it to our communities. We owe it to make our communities safer, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The coroner handing down her findings into the death of Kumanjayi Walker marked the conclusion of a long and difficult chapter for many people across the Northern Territory. The death of Kumanjayi Walker was a tragic event that has deeply affected his family, the 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙑 people and the Uibo community. We know this time has been incredibly challenging for everyone involved, including his family, the community and for the members of the NT Police. And its impact has been broad and far-reaching, affecting community trust and the morale of the NT Police Force. This inquest, which was initially scheduled to run for 3 months, extended almost 3 years, making it one of the longest and most complex inquiries ever undertaken in the Northern Territory. We welcome the conclusion of the lengthy process, and our work in response has now begun. We are taking the necessary time to carefully consider the coroner's findings and each of the 32 recommendations, while noting that much has changed since Kumanjayi Walker's death nearly 6 years ago. The coroner's 683-page report into this inquest took 3 years to deliver, so we owe it to the community to take the time necessary to properly assess and respond. We must be deliberate and considered in our approach, and our priority is to assess each of the findings in a thorough, responsible manner, informed by agency input and legal obligations. We must take our time and we must get this right. We're not going to rush to announce positions without doing the work. When the time comes, Territorians can be confident our government will be clear and transparent. As Attorney General, I have obligations as per the Coroners Act 1993 to coordinate the government's response to the coroner's findings. I will receive responses from relevant agencies which will contribute to a coordinated and consolidated report which will be tabled in the Legislative Assembly and provided to the coroner. The report will identify what actions have been taken, those currently underway, and any that are proposed in response to each recommendation. We understand this process has been long and painful for many, many people, and the effects are still being felt today. But the care we take now will shape how we move forward. Our government is committed to delivering a response that is considered, realistic and responsible, shaped by what is in the best interest of all Territorians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Daly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too stand here today alongside my colleagues to speak on this necessary motion. A motion that we all know needs to be treated with respect and decency. Madam Speaker, it's been over 3 weeks since the coroner delivered her findings into the tragic death of Kumanjayi Walker in 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙬𝙖𝙬 on the 9th of November 2019. As the coroner outlines in her report, Kumanjayi's passing and the circumstances that led to it is a tragedy for him, his family, his community and Australia. Madam Speaker, as I had stated, it has now been 3 weeks since the inquest report spanning more than 600 pages was handed down with 32 recommendations for reform, 10 of which were directly aimed at the government itself. Since the final coroner's report was released, we've heard from various sources, our police, legal experts, the NTPA and the federal government. We've heard from the family of Kumanjayi Walker and the voices of the 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙬 community crying out for action. But what we have not heard, Madam Speaker, is the official plan from the Chief Minister and the Police Minister moving forward. Instead, we have seen the Chief Minister downplay the recommendations outlined by the coroner, suggesting some are much less relevant than others and criticising the timeline of the inquest and its financial cost. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not the leadership Territorians deserve. Territorians deserve decisive leadership and action from this government. They claim to be doing this in every media release, but when it comes to showing tangible leadership, this is what we get, nothing. That is why this motion is essential, Mr Deputy Speaker, because today we are taking the critical first step in this Assembly to acknowledge the findings and recommendations of the report. We're acknowledging the impact of the tragedy of Kumanjayi Walker's death on his family and the community of 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙬. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Chief Minister must come out and outline the CLP government's plan to implement the recommendations of this inquiry. They owe it to Territorians, to the family and to our communities. So families can heal, so communities can have a chance to create a better future, because the recommendations go beyond just policing, Mr Deputy Speaker. They include youth diversion, community safety, community-led solutions, culturally appropriate service delivery. Approaches that we have brought up on the floor of the Assembly time and time again. Strengthening community-led governance in communities such as 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙬, co-designed youth strategies and culturally appropriate services, investment in diversion, rehabilitation and trauma-informed supports. Mr Deputy Speaker, this isn't just some bureaucratic wish list pulled from thin air. It has come from direct consultation with Aboriginal Territorians and the people of 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙬. What we require is targeted, adequately funded evidence-based proposals to rebuild trust and deliver real change, not just words. We know it works, Mr Deputy Speaker. We consistently turn to Groote Eylandt as the clear-cut example of this. Offending has halved since the Community Justice Group started operating because of strong community leadership and alternative justice programs. That's the positive outcomes we can see from genuine partnership with Aboriginal communities and should continue to see across the Territory. Again, Mr Deputy Speaker, we believe that people need to face consequences for their crimes and bad behaviour, but we need to ensure that crime prevention and community safety measures are balanced with the right investment to prevent crime in the first place. Mr Deputy Speaker, we also need to see the anti-racism strategy, the ongoing delivery of cultural awareness and anti-racism programs, training reforms, disbanding the immediate response team involved in this incident, and the creation of the Culturally Reform Command led by Leanne Little. Again, we welcome the NT's police force efforts to improve, to heal and build a better path forward with Aboriginal leadership and the broader community in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. There must be a clear direction set out by the CLP government on how it intends to renew this trust with our Aboriginal leaders. A first point of order would be to restore the $300,000 for the NT Police anti-racism review that was cut by the Attorney-General. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot help fix what you refuse to examine. You cannot reform a culture if you don't properly investigate it. We owe it to the memory of Kumanjayi Walker, we owe it to his family, and we owe it to every officer who wants to serve with integrity and pride. Mr Deputy Speaker, this motion is not just about words, it's about action. Ongoing neglect and inaction destroys lives, and that true justice will only continue when we start respecting the leadership, knowledge and authority of Aboriginal people. The coroner has again given the CLP government the blueprint. All that's left is for this government to show the courage to act. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Daly. Any other speakers? Member for Arafura.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I stand in this place to speak in support of the motion and join my colleagues in calling for the government to respond in a timely and meaningful way to the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjayi Walker. It has now been over 3 weeks since Coroner Elizabeth Armitage handed down her findings into the tragic, avoidable death of Kumanjayi Walker in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. 3 weeks and still no response from the CLP. No commitment, no timeline, no plan. We've heard from our police, from legal experts, from our NTPA, from the NTPA, from the federal government, and most importantly, we've heard from the Warlpiri people, from Kumanjayi Walker's family, and from the 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 community. But from the Chief Minister in a government crickets. Deputy Speaker, the Chief Minister has chosen to hide. She has decided to discuss the cost of the coronial process rather than the content of its finding. Try to downplay racism, sidestep responsibility, and shift the conversation to legislative reform that no one asks for. But what do Territorians want? And what do the 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 community deserve? It's leadership. Leadership means acknowledging hard truths. It means listening to the voices of those who've been harmed. And it means taking action, real meaningful action, to prevent another tragedy like this from happening again. That is why we have coronials in the first place. Deputy Speaker, the coronial inquest laid bare some painful truths about racism and the mistrust between some Aboriginal communities and the anti-police, about gaps in how we deliver policing and services in the bush. These are not easy conversations, but they are a necessary one. Let us not forget what the coroner found, that Kumanjayi Walker's death was avoidable. The recommendations should not be buried in bureaucracy or watered down in spin. They demand urgency, they demand respect, they demand change. The inquest made a series of clear, reasoned recommendations. These were not political statements, they were the product of a long and careful process, informed by evidence, expert testimony, and the lived experience of those most affected. Deputy Speaker, this government cannot claim to care about community safety if it refuses to act on the very recommendations designed to improve it. The coroner made 32 formal recommendations, 10 of which are directed at the government itself. These include
strengthening community-led governance in Yuendumu, co-designing youth strategies and culturally competent services, reinvesting in diversion, rehabilitation, and trauma-informed support, and fixing the dangerous gaps that still exist between frontline agencies. This is what community safety looks like. No more rhetoric, no more blame, but investment into preventions, in alternatives to custody, and in traditional knowledge of communities that know works. We know these approaches work. We've seen it with the success on the 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙼𝙖, where offending rates have dropped through strong community leadership and alternative justice programs. We know law and justice groups are vital, that early behavioral screening can change a person's life, a young person's life, that properly resourced rehabilitation, both inside and outside the correction system, reduces reoffending. And of course, people need to face consequences for the serious crimes. But we must balance that with investment in what prevents crime in the first place. Deputy Speaker, we also acknowledge the important role our police officers do. We know they operate in some of the most complex and challenging environments in the country. The vast majority do their jobs with integrity, courage, and care. But the system must support them to do that. That means investing in health and well-being services. It means equipping officers with training and cultural knowledge they need. And yes, it means confronting racism wherever it exists, so that every officer, every territory, and every community can have the confidence in the integrity of the force. This motion is not just about justice or accountability. Though those things matter deeply, it is also about healing and listening. It's about whether we will let this be just another report that gathers dust, or whether we honor the pain of our community by doing something with it. It's about trust, because right now the trust between the government and bush communities is broken. We've heard this message loud and clear. We know the Chief Minister has heard it too. It's time she listened, it's time she stopped hiding, and it's time she gave the moment the respect and urgency it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Arafura. Any other speakers? Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to start by acknowledging the Walker family, the Warlpiri people and the broader community in Yuendumu. As the coroner found, the death of Kumanjayi Walker was avoidable, and it is our great shame in the NT that there continues to be structural racism that is literally killing First Nations people. I'm sorry that this legacy of racism continues and that it has taken the life of someone you loved. I also want to acknowledge that in an open letter, the family and a number of frontline organisations have also called for the NT government to publicly commit to establishing a police ombudsman in the Northern Territory so that there are independent investigations of police misconducts and deaths in custody. We cannot have police investigating police any longer. Alongside this, they are also calling for the implementation of all the recommendations of the coroner's report. I stand behind both of these calls. We cannot sit by and allow the lives of Aboriginal people to be prematurely stolen at the hands of police. We are lucky to have the system in place where an expert meticulously examines such tragedies and provides recommendations on how we can prevent them from happening again. The coroner has done all of the hard legwork for us, and now this government has the opportunity to listen and act. These coronial findings are from an independent expert of law, Ms. Armitage. She delivered 33 recommendations that came from her comprehensive investigation in which she consulted widely. This is what an evidence-based approach looks like, with recommendations that have been deeply considered, with expertise from the community and sector alike. I thank the coroner for her work on this matter. I understand that implementing all of these recommendations will take time, resources and energy, and I think that it would be much simpler to just ignore or criticise them, as we saw the Chief Minister do last week on ABC Radio Alice Springs. But through a deep commitment to do better, to make evidence-based changes that we see in the report, we can make sure that there aren't more preventable deaths of First Nations people at the hands of police. Surely that is worth investing in. Madam Speaker, the CLP government consistently likes to remind us that they are putting community safety first. Well, this too is an issue of community safety. As the coroner found, the police are not an institution of safety for many First Nations people, but rather of racism, and in this case that led to the death of a young man. Your responsibility for community safety doesn't just apply to some people in the community, it applies to everyone in the NT. Let's take the safety of all Territorians seriously by implementing all the recommendations in this final report. And let's do that in consultation with Aboriginal communities, as identified in the Family's Open Letter that everyone in the chamber was sent yesterday. Quote, "These recommendations recognise what we have been trying to tell the government for many years, that it is only through self-governance, self-determination and full community control that Warlpiri people can begin to heal and then dream of a safer, happier future where our children flourish. Warlpiri people and all Aboriginal people want lasting change that uplifts our people and ensures a strong, healthy future for generations to come. We do not need to be fixed by others. Now is the time to genuinely listen, to clear the path for our autonomy and to provide resources and support that will enable us to shape our own future. This is what will bring lasting solutions and restore trust. These are not only the right things to do, they are essential steps to providing needless loss of life and build a better future for all. We are ready to work together for profound, lasting change." End quote. What a generous offer being made, that despite the harm at the hands of the police and the government that the Warlpiri people have experienced, they are willing and ready to work together. Let's say yes to this offer and establish a community-led oversight and implementation group, including Aboriginal elders, legal experts and community advocates, to ensure transparency and accountability, and alongside this, work towards giving power and governance back to communities. Communities want to be engaged and empowered. Let's not get in the way of this. We know that the community-led approaches are more effective and lead to long-term change. Since the death of Kumanjayi Walker, the family and broader community have been calling upon the government to give power back to Yuendamu and Aboriginal communities more broadly. It is well established across the community development sector that the communities know what is best for themselves, far more than any external entity. Communities know what will work to solve issues they are facing. It is time that we affirm the rights of Indigenous peoples per the call from Aboriginal people and per our obligation under the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People. Per Article 3, quote, "Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social and cultural development," end quote. Again and again, Aboriginal communities have told the NT government that the government's approach to crime and justice will not work. And yet again and again, this government is ignoring these calls and charging ahead with policy and legislative changes that are only further disenfranchising and alienating First Nations people. But we don't have to continue charging ahead with approaches that do not work. It is a sign of true leadership to recognise when we get it wrong. The Warlpiri community have humbly offered to work with the government. Let's respond with the same humility. Let's listen to and acknowledge the wisdom of communities and affirm their right to make decisions on things that will affect them. In both the 2024 coronial inquests into the death of 4 Aboriginal women and now again in this inquest, the coroner has found racism within the police force. The coroner found that Mr Rolfe was racist and showed racist behaviour and that this was, quote, "reflective of a work culture that tolerated racism," end quote. We desperately need to address this. I don't know how any government in 2025 could possibly not act on findings of structural racism within their police force. And yet during estimates we found out that the CLP government scrapped the review into racism within the NT police force. Ignoring the problem will not make it go away. In recognition of the findings of racism within the police, I implore the CLP to reinstate funding and commit to a thorough review that with time implements changes per the findings. This investigation should not just look at the NT police, but the NT's approach to policing and our criminal justice system more broadly. The punitive justice system is only institutionalising and traumatising members of our community. The significant overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the criminal justice system is yet more evidence of systemic racism, and we cannot allow it to continue. I urge the CLP government to stop their anti-evidence-based tirade that is costing the taxpayer excessively, but more importantly is killing people. Let us fully commit to the recommendations of the coroner alongside the calls from the community of Yuendamu and the Walker family. And I thank the member for Q for bringing this to the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nightcliff. Member for Mulca.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker. I rise to support the motion brought by the member for 𝙍𝙬𝙬, and I thank him for bringing this important motion today. I'd like to acknowledge the family of Kumanjayi Walker for the past 6 years. They have been on a very painful path. Their family member was shot and killed in their house, and this never should have happened. He was dragged to the police car and then kept behind the locked door as he passed away. His family were locked away and locked up, rather, not knowing that he had died. And despite the sadness, grief, and anger, the family, peaceful family, have peaceful thought for justice. They have shown leadership and courage, and they have been diplomatic, calling on the government for justice. The information that the public and before the coronial inquiry was that upstanding police officer had killed a man in self-defense. By the end of the coronial inquiry, we had a very different picture what had happened. And this coronial was about truth-telling. This was an opportunity for the truth behind the death to be told. 𝙍𝙀𝙈𝙀𝙀 Rolfe was not an understanding police officer. He was a troubled officer who was racist and had many arrests that were being questioned because of the violence used against Aboriginal people in those arrests. The coroner also found that Rolfe was not one bad people, one bad apple rather, but he was part of a public and police force that had significant hallmarks of institutional racism. The truth-telling that happened as part of the coronial process provided some healing for the family and the community, but also for those of us who looked on from other communities. We knew what had happened that night, and in 2019 was not right, and the real story must be told. The coroner did her job in telling the reasons for this death, and her report was needed for the people of the Northern Territory because we all had a right to know how a police officer had walked into someone's home and shot them 3 times at close range. And in this coronial inquest, or inquiry rather, the entire story was told. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the death of Kumanjayi Walker did not highlight a new problem. It highlighted an issue that have always existed and will always exist in this system if it is not changed. Families in 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙍 remember and still grieve the death of my Wawa, cousin brother, Mr. Garaura, who was suffering severe mental health issue in 1990 when he was shot on the beach by police after he had been violent and unwell. Following my Wawa's death, the family still recall their distress when they were not allowed near the body. The body was left on the beach overnight without the protection of family. They could not provide a ceremony for the deceased, and this caused much hurt. The same hurt that Kumanjayi Walker's family felt 30 years ago they were tricked into the thinking of he was still alive and he had passed away. These actions illustrated that our authority, culture and ceremony were not considered important. The obligation that we have to, and we have the deceased on our law to perform the ceremony of singing their spirits home and treating them their body as a sacred object is treated with apathy and contempt. It is dismissed by the Balanda system as though we are no one, as though we are no one and our culture is nothing. Policing in our remote communities is not the same as policing in town. The police that come to our communities need to be supported by a system that understands community policing on Aboriginal country. Mr. Speaker, our language and law remain. There are leaders and elders on our land and they hold authority. When police come onto our country, there needs to be a way to work together. No police walking over the top. These are the systemic issues. It is a broken system that does not observe two-way laws or partnership. It is a hierarchy from the top to the bottom, and it places us, the First Nations communities, on the bottom. There are many good police officers who spend time in our communities, who try their best to be best in broken system to work with people. Mr. Speaker, I know this does happen when leaders stand with police, law, and try to bring people and calm things that we can quietly go and collect a person in stripe who is walking around with weapons and stuff, that I have done it, that I have went to actually collect the person and tell them quietly and said, go to police, give yourself up, and nothing will happen. And they have done that so many times in my time. So that is what can happen. If leaders stand together with those people, with police, I say again, if leaders stand alongside the police, the law and order, nothing will happen because we will all work together. So it is more safer that way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 1991, the coroner is honored as Jeremiah McGregor made many comments, suggestions, and recommendations in his report to address the importance of police working with elders, leaders, and community. We outlined that in our remote Aboriginal community, it would have been appropriate for police to meet with their chairperson of the community council beforehand to provide information about the police operation. He also made the point that the police aides or Yolngo working with police should be given equal status to the senior police officer so that an alliance can be formed. All these points are still relevant today. They speak to the tragedy of what happened in 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙍 in 1990 and what happened in Untitled in 2019. If elders and leaders had been given the respect of the police as authorities on their land, the outcome of both cases would have been very different. Following one another, police incident in 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀 in 2006, the community of several hundred people came together with police for mediation. The result of the mediation was the 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙑 agreement, named after a young man who was threatened by a police with a gun. Today, not many police are aware of the 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀 agreement, but it outlines that the way the community of 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀 wanted to work with the local police. There were several points to the agreement, and that began with an apology by the police to 𝙍𝙀𝙇 and his treatment, and outlined a cross-cultural training program for all police officers in 𝙍𝙬𝙀 provided by the local community. It included the creation of police advisory group, whereby local elders and police would work together and create a maturely respectful working relationship between the police and the community. Having regard to Yolngo and non-Yolngo system of law, the agreement outlined that the agreements set out were intended to be long-term commitments. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mulca. Any other speakers? Member for Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak in support of this motion, and I thank the member for 𝙍𝙬𝙬 for bringing this to the chamber today. As we've heard, this motion calls on us to acknowledge the findings of the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjayi Walker and to call for urgent, meaningful and community-led action to ensure that what happened to Kumanjayi Walker never happens to anyone ever again. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I cannot continue without acknowledging that we're already too late. It has already happened again. I stand here today also in solidarity with the family of Kumanjayi White, whose tragic death underscores the urgency of this moment. I want to begin by acknowledging Kumanjayi's family, the 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙼𝙖𝙬 people and the wider 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙀𝙀𝙀 community. The grief you have carried, the strength you have shown and the dignity with which you have pursued truth and justice is something that we all must listen to and learn from. Thank you for your courage, for your grace and for your leadership. This inquest and its findings reveal something painful but essential, that our systems, even when they're filled with people who believe they are doing and want to do the right thing, can still create outcomes that are deeply unfair, harmful and tragic. The coroner's role, as we know, is not to assign blame but to determine how a person died and then to identify what must change to prevent future deaths. That role is a part of the separation of powers in our democratic system, a fundamental principle of that system. The judiciary must be independent, and when a coroner makes findings, it's not political. It's based on law, on evidence and on truth-seeking. Respecting the coroner's independence means taking these findings seriously, even and especially when they are uncomfortable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must listen carefully to the coroner's findings. Not just read them, not just file them, but sit with them, learn from them and act on them. Because it's not only a failure of policing that this inquest uncovered, but a failure of our institutions to uphold the dignity, safety and humanity of all people, particularly Aboriginal people here in the Northern Territory. The coroner described a police culture with embedded racism, a failure to listen, a breakdown in trust, a leadership failure to confront warning signs, and a system that treated cultural knowledge as an obstacle and not an asset. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must face this truth without defensiveness and without delay. That's why the first part of this motion is so important, to formally acknowledge the findings and the pain that has been caused. We owe that at a minimum to the 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙀𝙀 people, to Kumanjayi's family and to the many Aboriginal people across the Territory and throughout Australia who saw in this tragedy something deeply familiar. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's not enough to simply express sorrow. What matters now is action, and not action that's done to Aboriginal people, but action done with them. The coroner made 35 recommendations. They include cultural safety training, supporting the 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙀𝙀 peacemakers, changes to police recruitment and deployment, improvements to community policing, and many other things. And this motion calls for those recommendations to be implemented in full. That must be our baseline commitment. And implementation, as I said, must happen in consultation with Aboriginal communities as equals. But to truly understand what needs to change, we must first understand what the coroner's findings revealed. There's so much discomfort in this chamber when we hear the word racism. So much discomfort that sometimes when a question is asked about it, it's shut down. When we talk about systemic and institutional racism, we are not talking about bad people. We're talking about systems, rules, cultures and policies that without meaning to create unfair outcomes, and that harms all of us. Even when people have good intentions, the systems they work in can produce results that are deeply unjust. I said that in this chamber yesterday and I'll keep saying it until I feel like it can be heard. And it's not just bad for Aboriginal people, it's bad for every single one of us. It's bad for the police. When racist behaviours or language are allowed to go unchallenged, it damages the reputation of the entire force. I have had so many police officers contacting me saying, we want this to be addressed. This harms us, this harms our reputation. It undermines the good work that we do with integrity and commitment. When the system protects the worst behaviours instead of stopping them, it creates a culture where good officers are judged by the worst examples. That's exactly what the coroner found happened in this case in the Northern Territory Police. I hope that everyone here has read the findings of the coroner. I know they're very long, but I recommend them to everyone here. But for people who haven't, let me share just a few of the examples outlined in her findings. She found that racist awards like Coon of the Year and offensive certificates were given out annually, and no one in leadership challenged them. She heard that racist language was widespread and normalised, including terms like animal bar to describe places where Aboriginal people gathered. She heard that senior officers knew about these practices but did not act. She found that the Northern Territory Police displayed significant signs of institutional racism, meaning racism was embedded in how decisions were made, who got stopped, who got arrested, how people were treated, and how force was used, in this case, fatally. What this means is that the system itself dehumanises Aboriginal people, seeing them as threats rather than as citizens, as problems to manage rather than people to serve and work alongside. She found it made excessive force more likely. It made accountability less likely. In the words of the coroner, the grotesque examples of racism that were normalised by the Territory Police Force meant that she could not rule out that racism was a factor in Kumanjayi Walker's avoidable death. As I said, that does not mean that every police officer is racist. It means the system needs to change, and it's our job in this place to lead that change. And that means we need to be honest. We need to be willing to listen and have hard conversations, even when it's uncomfortable. Because we cannot say that Kumanjayi's death was a tragedy and then walk away from the changes that would stop it happening again. The coroner's findings are not just a report card. They give us a very clear path forward. They tell us what has gone wrong and they tell us what needs to be fixed. And now it's up to us, not just police leadership, not just the lawyers, but every one of us in this assembly to make sure that the recommendations are followed, that the community is at the centre of change, and that Aboriginal people are treated with the dignity, respect and fairness that is every single person's right in the Northern Territory. In this chamber, we are tasked with making laws that serve every person here. And many of the recommendations in this coronial are absolutely relevant to the law that this government is asking us to pass on urgency tomorrow with the changes to the Youth Justice Act. For these laws, we have been given 24 hours I have been given 24 hours for understanding, for consideration and for response. The government says it needs careful deliberation to properly respond to these coronial recommendations. Yet at the same time, it asks us to vote on laws that will fundamentally impact human rights and lead to more Aboriginal children being locked up, all on urgent notice with barely a day to consider them. How can we, on the one hand, demand time to consider some changes while rushing through others that carry profound consequences? We cannot have it both ways. If safety and justice are truly the priority for every single person here in the Northern Territory, then every decision must be made with the same level of care and respect. We now have the truth before us, the voices of families, the findings of the coroner and the calls from the community. Let's act on what we've learned. Let's do the hard work of turning this knowledge into action so that the laws that we make here in this chamber and the systems we uphold protect every life, protect every culture and build a safe, fairer future for all of us. We've heard the Walker family's generous invitation already in this chamber. Warlpiri people and all Aboriginal people want lasting change that uplifts our people and ensures a strong, healthy future for generations to come. We are ready to work together for profound, lasting change. We urge you to act now and act boldly. Let's accept this invitation. Let's work together. Let's work boldly with honesty, courage and care to make sure that this never happens again. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Johnson. Any further speakers? Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It has been over 3 weeks since Coroner Elizabeth Armitage delivered her findings into the tragic death of Kumanjayi Walker in Yingiya on the 9th of November 2019. 3 weeks and the community is none the wiser about whether the CLP government will actually respond to the 33 recommendations delivered by the coroner. Sensible, practical recommendations, Mr Deputy Speaker, that support safer, stronger communities across the Territory. The Chief Minister, who is also the Police Minister, has ducked around questions about her government's response. She has also avoided a straight answer. Chief Minister for 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙆𝙀 has criticised the process of the coroner. She's talked about how long it took, how much money it cost, but not actually what the government's response is to the report. And the one thing the Chief Minister hasn't done is acknowledge those findings around engaging them in any meaningful way. We have heard from NT Police. We have heard from the NT Police Association. We have heard from Kumanjayi's family, from the community of Yingiya. But it is clear the one person Territorians are missing in this conversation is Chief Minister Leah Finocchiaro. And sounds like she would prefer it all went away. Well, 3 years is a long time to dodge questions, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'm not saying that she can't raise questions or queries around the time frame of how long it took or the costs, which I know has been a concern for people. It is absolutely reasonable to ask those questions and raise those concerns on behalf of Territorians. But what the Chief Minister is very well aware of, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that the specific issues that impacted on both the timing and the costs of the inquest, including a number of legal appeals, is something she has not acknowledged publicly, and she should. Chief Minister Leah Finocchiaro conveniently sidesteps those facts in every conversation, just as she sidesteps anything that is too hard or too uncomfortable for her or her CLP team to actually answer and to lead with, particularly when anyone gets in the way of the Chief Minister's glossy, shallow sloganeering. The coronial recommendations certainly fit into that category for the Chief Minister: too hard, too uncomfortable, too slack to lead. So rather than action and certainty, which of course is the CLP slogan for this year, then those opposite would like to spruik, we see ducking and weaving from the very leader that they follow. Mr Deputy Speaker, we see deflection, we see finger pointing, we see blame and pathetic name calling. And it's starting to become a pretty standard tactic for the CLP government led by Leah Finocchiaro. And quite frankly, any conversation or public statement by the Chief Minister which doesn't fit in the highly staged rhetoric and practice messaging is something that they ignore or throw rocks at. But in doing so, Mr Deputy Speaker, they are letting Territorians down, all Territorians, black and white. They diminish who we are as a community. They deny individuals, communities and organisations the chance to learn from mistakes of the past, to make sure there is space for change and improvement, and ultimately make the Territory a better and safer Territory for all. The CLP deny families the chance to heal. The CLP deny communities the chance at a better future. And the CLP deny our police with more and better support to do their incredibly difficult work. And it is poor leadership under Leah Finocchiaro as the Chief Minister. It is simply not good enough for Territorians, and they deserve better. And Mr Deputy Speaker, today under this motion brought to the House by my colleague, the member for Guyula, who represents the community of Yingiya and lives in Central Australia, we call on the Chief Minister to do the right thing and to engage fully and meaningfully with the outcomes of this important Territory inquest, to commit to implementing the recommendations in full and to work with and walk with the community members of Yuendumu and indeed all of our remote Aboriginal communities when it comes to community-led solutions for a safer, fairer justice system across the Northern Territory. We ask the Chief Minister to work with our police to improve community policing and to rid the force of those elements, those very small number of individuals that do not serve the community as they should, which has been highlighted in this inquest. Madam Speaker, we call on the Chief Minister to do this because it isn't just about the people of Yuendumu. It isn't just an Aboriginal problem. It is something that affects the whole Territory community, and it goes to the heart of community safety, the very thing that the CLP says they are focused on. And Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coronial report does something I doubt that the Chief Ministers have bothered to read it. It contains some very distressing content. And there are a few things that do unfortunately stand out. For example, the particulars of Kumanjayi Walker's short life, a story that sadly is more common here in the Territory than one would think. A baby boy born with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, 𝙍𝙬𝙖𝙈𝙬𝙀, which was never properly diagnosed. His parents passed away when he was still a child. He was exposed to domestic violence and alcohol abuse from a young age. He lived in overcrowded home and unsuitable housing. His hearing problems went largely untreated, and he had difficulties at school because of all of those above elements. And this is not to deny, Mr Deputy Speaker, the fact that Kumanjayi Walker committed serious crimes that negatively impacted his community and the people around him. He did, and he deserved to face the consequences for those actions. But what is clear from the Coronial report is that the cards were stacked against him, sadly, from the outset and the very beginning of his life. He was on a collision course with the justice system, but what the report has highlighted is he didn't have to be. When he was receiving the right supports, Kumanjayi Walker is reported to have thrived. When those supports weren't available to him, any progress that he made, unfortunately, fell away. He would be back to chaos, dysfunction and offending. There are real lessons in this real story, lessons that we absolutely should be heeding if we are to genuinely tackle crime and the root causes of crime. This is what the community expects of us as parliamentarians and what they expect of their Territory government. Mr Deputy Speaker, all of the evidence tells us that early intervention and prevention in the life of a child who may be struggling with a host of social, health, cognitive and wellbeing issues can certainly make a difference to help them thrive. And I'm not sure how many members of this chamber have spent time reading Coronial reports. It can be quite heavy, this one in particular, but ones in the past, when I was formerly the Attorney-General, Mr Deputy Speaker, are extremely distressing, particularly ones about children. This is why it is beyond belief that this CLP government, which has staked its entire reputation on fixing crime and making communities safer, would deliberately disregard and, in fact, talk about defunding such an important process when it comes to policies and initiatives that prevent crime in the first place and that early intervention, which we know can make a difference. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coronial findings include 5 recommendations for NT health along these lines. The first is around screening every child under 5 years of age who comes into contact with an NT primary healthcare service, and to ensure any child presenting with indicators of 𝙍𝙬𝙖𝙈𝙬 are referred and followed up for early childhood intervention plan under the NDIS. We know that children and young people with 𝙍𝙬𝙖 are disproportionately represented in our Territory justice system, and it is an absolute no-brainer to focus on investment and effort into this very area. The federal government has committed funding through the Central Australia Plan to ensure more children are able to be assessed for neurodevelopmental issues. There is a real opportunity for the NT government to partner with the federal government, with communities, to ensure every child who needs to see screening does. For the sake of all Territorians, I strongly encourage the CLP government to take this one up as a primary action. Madam Speaker, community safety cannot be achieved in isolation. It cannot be achieved with punitive measures alone. It is something that requires a coordinated, sustained and very deliberate effort, which is why it is of great concern that the Chief Minister, 𝙭𝙖𝙑𝙖𝙑𝙖 seems incapable of building strong, meaningful relationships with the federal government, with organisations across the territory, with those community grassroots organisations, and indeed, it seems, just as of last week, Aboriginal leadership across the territory. This is becoming alarming to us, Madam Speaker. The Chief Minister and her CLP government make expedient decisions in isolation and seemingly for the purpose of media headlines. There is no effort to consult or engage with frontline organisations, with communities, with those who have expertise in the areas that decision-making requires. Madam Speaker, we hear time and time again from Territorians and Territory organisations that the CLP government gives them now no time. They do not want to listen. They do not want to collaborate with these organisations. And it is an extremely dangerous way to govern, Madam Speaker. Turning the government's back on, closing their ears to and pointing the finger at the very Territorians who are seeking to be part of the collaborative solution for the Northern Territory. Instead, we see Chief Minister 𝙭𝙭𝙑𝙖𝙑𝙖 attacking, criticising, name-calling, finger-pointing and deflecting on everything but her leadership. And now we are starting to see, this week in particular, Madam Speaker, the CLP ministers copying suit. And our opposition is calling on the Chief Minister, on the behalf of the many, many Territorians who have raised concerns with us, not just in our electorates, but across the Territory, about the government's approach. Organisations who are too scared to speak out because they are being threatened with funding cuts, Madam Speaker. This is not leadership and this is not governing at its best. Madam Speaker, as I said before, parts of the Coronial report make for very difficult reading. But it also acknowledges the incredible work done by so many members of the Northern Territory Police Force in conjunction with the communities that they serve in and with. It is a testament to all of those police officers serving in remote communities who do not just see themselves as law enforcement, but part of those communities. Madam Speaker, these police officers make every effort to learn from and integrate into the community they are serving, and in doing so they play an integral role in community safety and community thriving. The NT Police Association President Nathan Finn has recounted on a number of occasions in the media on his own experiences as a police officer working in remote communities. Mr Finn spoke about the way officers back then took the time to kick the footies with the kids and integrate in community life, to be part of the community and build those relationships. Madam Speaker, we know that there are still officers doing that in our communities right now, but there's no doubt that much of their time is taken up, unfortunately, with complex and heavy workloads. And there is a lot of pressure on them every day to do this work and to not get to that community engagement relationship stage. Madam Speaker, I travelled to Alice Springs just after the tragic death in custody of Kumanjayi White just last month. And I met with a number of elders from Yuendumu who were in Alice Springs at the time, and some community members and organisations and a couple of business people. And for the elders, Madam Speaker, despite mourning these two tragic and avoidable deaths from the community relations, what they told me, these leaders, Madam Speaker, from Yuendumu told me, is that they want to be part of the long-term solution. They want to help come up with better ways to shore up community safety working with police, which is why it's been so important to support this motion from the member for Guyula as the local member who's been tasked in his electorate to bring this to the Parliament. Madam Speaker, these elders are sad, they are angry, but again, they want to be part of a real and constructive solution. They've also asked, unfortunately I couldn't answer, why wasn't the Chief Minister in Alice Springs to meet with them and to talk with them, to walk alongside them? I couldn't answer, Madam Speaker. The Coronial report recommends a mutual respect agreement for Yuendumu community. This would effectively put in place clear rules of engagement between police and the community. It would outline what is and what isn't acceptable from both sides of the agreement. And Madam Speaker, I have knowledge and respect for this process, as there has been a mutual respect agreement in place in the community of Nooka in my electorate of Arnhem since 2009. It builds on lessons learned after an unfortunate arrest involving a respected elder in that community. This agreement in Nooka includes cross-cultural training, clarity and understanding around relationships in the community, the importance of respect and communication, awareness of sacred sites and ceremonial grounds, introductions for new police officers to elders in the community and the region, and key people in the community, and regular community police consultations. Madam Speaker, it is an important and enduring agreement that has helped to ensure good relationships between police and the community in Nooka, and the mutual respect agreement was reinvigorated through the local decision-making process when the new police station was completed in Nooka in 2022. There is no reason why a mutual respect agreement can't be reached in Yuendumu and other communities with these other models already in place. And it doesn't cost much money at all, Madam Speaker, just requires everyone sitting down together and agreeing on the standards of behaviour and engagement for that region or that community based on what is culturally and respectfully appropriate. Again, I acknowledge the work that has already been done or underway by our NT Police and the people of Yuendumu towards shared goals of understanding since this sadness. And I commend the NT Police for their willingness to look at how they can work more effectively in our remote communities. And this is a sign of true leadership, Madam Speaker, accepting there are lessons that have been learned and that the mistakes of the past should never be repeated. There are opportunities to make these changes which benefit everyone for the better. And Madam Speaker, turning to some of the other recommendations, the coroner also highlighted the critical role of Aboriginal liaison officers and our Aboriginal community police officers in building and supporting community safety. The Coronial talked about the important work that they do in these roles in de-escalating solutions, understanding relationships, providing cultural advice and supporting the community in our grassroots-led approach to policing. We know these officers do incredibly nuanced work, and they do it with enormous dedication and sensitivity, and often go home and do not clock off. It is critical that the government continues to invest in recruiting and retaining our amazing Aboriginal liaison officers and Aboriginal community police officers across the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, the coroner also recommended further work goes into making our NT police force more representative of the community, with a target of 30% Aboriginal workforce, reflecting the Territory's population. The coroner also recommended that more Aboriginal people in the police force are given the opportunity and support to move into leadership positions. As growing our own and seeing what's happened in other departments, the police are definitely taking the front foot on this, and I commend them for that. This is vital for a number of reasons. Firstly, it ensures a more culturally responsive workforce, improving communication, strengthening local relationships, and reducing misunderstandings. It opens up career opportunities for Aboriginal Territorians right across the NT and the force. And it ensures that one in every three of our police officers will be homegrown, and we know that recruitment and retention is a constant challenge for our police force right across the country, and this helps to ensure that there is a steady, stable workforce with less turnover in the Territory, because our officers will be Territory born and bred. And the cost benefit of investing in our Aboriginal police is clear. What is less clear, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, is why the Chief Minister does not seem interested in these important and practical options for improving community safety. There's no leadership on that. Madam Speaker, it is important to recognise the work that the NT Police has already undertaken in the wake of Kumanjayi Walker's avoidable death. This includes the ongoing development of an anti-racism strategy and the establishment of their Cultural Reform Command. If the Chief Minister would care to update the Parliament on this particular strategy, I think Territorians would stop and listen. Instead, the Chief Minister is avoiding responsibility by criticising the coroner for taking too long, or by saying she'll take her time to respond in her so-called year of action and certainty. And meanwhile, we see the NT Police
Please pause, Opposition Leader. Member for Arafura.
Standing Order 43, request a extension.
Is an extension granted?
Aye.
You have the support. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam
of the
Speaker, and
chamber.
thank you to the member for Arafura. Meanwhile, Madam Speaker, we see our police who have already got on with the work of reform. They have acknowledged that this process requires ongoing responsibility and continuous journey. The police have pledged to work with the government, with Aboriginal leadership and with the broader community of the Territory to make sure policing is fit for purpose, particularly across our remote areas. And Madam Speaker, I take the opportunity to commend our police for their work and their commitment to focusing on the restoration of trust and relationships across communities with police. And again, we call on the CLP government to show a similar level of interest and care in working together on real solutions by community and not just punitive measures. Madam Speaker, the most recent crime stats here in the Territory released just the other week clearly shows that the community is not feeling safe and is not being safe. And this is not improving under the CLP, despite their promises. This is why the support of the work of the police and the reforms that are underway by police, without the leadership of the Police Minister, are so important to the bigger picture. Madam Speaker, we've seen the Police Watch House, we've heard the Police Watch's houses, particularly in Palmerston, talked about in the media recently, bursting at the seams with remand prisoners. We have more people languishing in jail, waiting for their sentence to be heard, than we actually have people who've been convicted and sentenced for a crime. We have courts and the legal community under enormous pressure, dealing with a backlog of cases and who are forced to operate in a state of chaos. Madam Speaker, we heard estimates just last month that the jails are so full there are few rehabilitation programs running. Funding for youth diversion has been cut, and we have learnt just today what the actual Youth Justice Amendment Bill looks like. Madam Speaker, young people in jail here in the Territory unfortunately face a stark reality. Most who have FASD or a range of chronic cognitive disorders, often severe hearing loss and mental health disorders or other disabilities. These young people do not have access to culturally appropriate healthcare because we've seen just recently one of the key health providers, 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙆𝙼𝙍, has pulled out their services due to the conditions there. Madam Speaker, this situation is untenable and it is growing worse day by day. And yet the CLP, the government in charge who said they would provide certainty, action and security, has doubled down on their approach when it comes to supporting real justice. And this is not something that is going to better the Territory. Madam Speaker, it is absolutely critical that the CLP government starts to reinvest in alternatives to justice. We have seen these programs work in communities right across the Territory, including in my own electorate of Arnhem, and we've spoken many times about the 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙆 Cultural Rehabilitation Centre, Madam Speaker, where young Untitled men are focused on who have offended between the ages of 17 and 25. They are supported by community members, family members and our cultural leaders over on 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙇 Island. And there is now a cultural rehabilitation centre that has been built with Untitled money from the trust, from the mine, community members with their own solutions and putting into community infrastructure to have this justice centre so that there can be healing and there can be support by those who've been lost and find themselves in trouble for doing the wrong thing. The Untitled leaders and elders, particularly the past chairman of the late chairman of the ALC, the Untitled Land Council, Mr. 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙆𝙆, they showed the leadership because they said we are not giving up on our young people. We want our young people to heal, and they must heal here with us in the community, on our island, in the culturally appropriate way, because in a few years' time, they will start to work through, again, the pathways of leadership to become the next generation of elders in that area. So the work that has been done, particularly around justice, reoffending, reinvestment on Groote Eylandt and Bickenden Island, the rates of reoffending have dramatically decreased, Madam Speaker, and the numbers say that they have almost halved offending now. This needs to continue. I know the member for Arafura mentioned it as well. This needs to continue across the Northern Territory, and it needs to be community-led, and it needs to be supported not just by the community but also by the government. And the CLP government need to start to be very direct and very deliberate in their commitments to investing in law and justice groups. We've heard, I think it was just yesterday, the member for Guyula ask the Attorney-General, how many law and justice groups has the Attorney-General, Marie-Clare Boothby, the member for Brennan, visited in the Territory? There's only 6, Madam Speaker, that are officially registered, and I looked at it, I think it was yesterday, the Attorney-General's website. There are 6 official law and justice groups registered who are linked to the community courts process, which, again, something that our former Labor government brought back. I think it was the member for Berkeley who was digging really desperately and deep back to 2005. Well, we brought it back, was it last year? 2024? 22? We brought it back in 2023. And the member for Berkeley is talking about 2005, so desperately living in the past, desperately deflecting. But that is working, Madam Speaker. We've seen it on Groote Eylandt. We've even heard the Attorney-General talk about the results on Groote Eylandt. You know, she can claim it all she wants, whatever, because it's Anna Diliak's work, not hers. But, Madam Speaker, I've heard also in my electorate, in another part of my electorate, that a law and justice group, an established law and justice group which covers 3 communities, it's a regional one, 3 communities, have been told to go back and prove that they deserve the funding that they've got. This has been years and years in the making, and Aboriginal law and justice groups, community elders, community leaders who are offering community solutions are being pulled back by the CLP government, who obviously doesn't believe in making a difference and making justice better here in the Northern Territory, and being asked to try and defend the work that they're doing from a community-led solution. And then on the other hand, Madam Speaker, I've heard people from the CLP, members of the CLP government ask, oh, where's the Aboriginal leadership in all of this? Why isn't the Aboriginal leadership standing up and talking about, well, they're out there, they're doing it, they just need the support of your government. So if you know, if you care, please make sure you tell your Attorney-General to do her job, to go out to visit those 6 law and justice groups, to sit down in the dirt and to listen for herself the big difference it makes when community leaders and elders are in charge of the solutions when it comes to justice in their communities and in their regions. There's only 6. She can plan one every 2 years or whatever, or 2 every year that's left. She'll get to all 6 of them by the end of the term if she's that well planned. I don't know, an Attorney-General who wouldn't have visited a law and justice group in 12 months of being government. Madam Speaker, yes, young people absolutely need to face the consequences of the crime or bad behaviour that they are responsible for. They also need to see that there is a balance between punitive approaches, crime prevention and community safety measures. And right now, it's like we are on a ship sitting dangerously, standing dangerously to one side of capsizing and perhaps slightly sinking under Leah Finocchiaro's chief ministership. We need to see the changes now, Madam Speaker, in mentality, in concept, in practice of the government, so it balances out. We are not seeing a government brave enough to do better for the Territory. We are hearing the same message loud and clear from many sections across the Territory. And we know that the Chief Minister and her team, who are always talking about being out and about, are hearing the same messages that we are also. And it's time they listened. It's time that they acted in the way that Territorians are asking them to when it comes to justice, smarter, safer and fairer justice in the Northern Territory to improve what happens when it comes to the Territory's future. Because if they keep saying the words they are saying and not doing the action that is required of them, we will never see anything change for the better here in the Territory when it comes to justice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any other speakers? Member for 𝙍𝙬𝙖𝙈𝙀𝙬 in closing debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do take a moment in closing to certainly acknowledge the contributions made by honourable members in this chamber this evening, and of course extend my heartfelt thanks for those who have contributed to this important motion that I have brought forward on behalf of Yapa of Central Australia and the community of 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙬𝙬 and the Walker family, the Robertson family, the Lane family and the Brown family. Madam Speaker, we've heard from a number of members in this parliament on the opposition and the crossbench, and I acknowledge that the Attorney-General has also spoken on this. As we have heard around those contributions, there absolutely were a complex range of circumstances that led us to where we are today, and that is that Kumanjayi Walker was killed, was shot 3 times in his home in 𝙍𝙬𝙬. That's not to dismiss, you've heard from members in here, that there were certainly challenges in Kumanjayi Walker's life. Kumanjayi Walker was exposed to a number of areas where he needed help: mental health, substance abuse, 𝙍𝙀𝙇. We heard in and saw in the coronial areas that can be improved to better respond so that we don't see that happen again. Madam Speaker, silence is the biggest injustice, because silence means turning away from people and their suffering instead of confronting it. Silence means letting harm continue because speaking up is inconvenient or uncomfortable. Silence allows those in power to avoid accountability. And silence, Madam Speaker, sends a message to victims, families and communities that their pain doesn't matter. When leaders stay silent in the face of violence, systemic failure or injustice, they become complicit. Silence might feel safe, but it protects the status quo. And in the Northern Territory, where lives are being lost, communities are grieving, and young people are crying out for help, silence is not neutral. Silence is fatal. Madam Speaker, this letter that was provided on behalf of the Justice for Walker Never Again movement was addressed to the Chief Minister, was addressed to the Attorney-General, to Steve Edgington, the Minister for Health and Aboriginal Affairs, to Robin Carl, the Minister for Children and Families, to Joe Hersey, the Minister for Education and Training, and to Jinson Charles, the Minister for Youth, Seniors and Equality. It was also addressed to the Northern Territory Acting Police Commissioner. Only one of those names are not here today. That is the Acting Northern Territory Police Commissioner. Out of all of those other names, one person had the courage to stand up in this parliament and speak. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. and that's the Northern Territory's Attorney-General. So Minister Edgington, shame on you. Minister Carl, shame on you. Minister Hersey, shame on you. Chief Minister, shame on you. Minister Charles, shame on you. You all had an opportunity to speak in this chamber this evening. Whether you responded head-on to the coronial recommendations, that was your prerogative, or whether you took the opportunity to speak about what you are doing as a responsible Northern Territory Cabinet Minister in the areas of making life better for Aboriginal Territorians, you had a choice to stand up and to speak, but you were silent. The Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Steve Edgington, and the Minister for Disability Services, Jinson Charles, your silence is particularly the worst. Silence in this chamber today, silence when Kumanjayi his life was taken in Alice Springs, in a confectionery aisle in Coles. No offer of condolence, no visiting of the sorry camps of the families. They were met with silence. Let that silence be known for what it is. Madam Speaker, I absolutely want to thank everyone who has contributed and their meaningful contribution. Whether it's directly responding to the motion that was put up, whether it was sharing a lived experience from one of their communities in their electorates and their family members, as the member for Mulka did, the member for Arnhem, member for Daly, member for Arafura, member for Nightcliff and member for Johnson, all spoke about the importance of us needing to do better as a parliament and as a territory together. Madam Speaker, we have heard again about a number of things that people have called for. I want to take a moment to just reflect again on what Ned Hargraves has said in our communities. Ned has continually said, no guns, more peace. Keep culture strong, keep guns out. These are all important things to speak about, Madam Speaker, because they mean something to people. They mean something to my community. And that is absolutely important, Madam Speaker. So yes, there are many things that need to be done. The only contribution from the government, again from the Attorney-General, was saying that we're not going to commit to anything right now, we're working through it, and everything deserves to be worked through. Young people's lives deserve to be worked through, and this government picks and chooses what it considers and what it doesn't. Because right now, this week in Parliament, you have come in here and said that you are passing the Youth Justice Act on urgency, and you have not given anyone any time to consider the implications of that. You've not given anyone time to consider what the consequences are or the unintended consequences. The Youth Justice Act and the death of Kumanjayi Walker are interconnected. Because if we don't get the settings right when it comes to youth justice, and we don't provide the appropriate supports and resources for diversion, for programs, we risk seeing this continue to happen because those supports are not in place. So I reject the Attorney-General's comments today that in 3 weeks they could not have had a response in relation to those recommendations. I know, Madam Speaker, that when I was the Attorney General and when I was a Cabinet Minister, we were forced by our Chief Minister to absolutely read the coronials and the recommendations, and we would come back as a Cabinet for a special Cabinet meeting, and we would talk about how each and every one of us had to be responsible for implementing the recommendations, and that we would have regular meetings to inform and do progress updates around how the work was happening. So we must do better. There is no excuse, Madam Speaker, because every Territorian matters. And yes, I absolutely acknowledge that Kumanjayi Walker might not have been a perfect person. Who is? There should have been appropriate support services over successive governments to support this young man and his family. And successive governments have failed, regardless of who they are. We have gotten to where we have because a young man was able to fall through the cracks and he wasn't supported. He wasn't provided the interventions, the therapeutic responses, the help to get his life sorted and to stop the trajectory of him entering into the criminal justice system and later being killed. 3 bullets shot at him. Nobody in the Northern Territory or in the world deserves to die. There are absolutely things that we can do, and the coronial inquest provides that pathway for us to make sure that every death in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, is preventable, and that is important. It's incredibly, incredibly important. Madam Speaker, this has been difficult for a number of members in this parliament, and it's going to continue to be difficult for a number of members in this parliament as we wait for the government to table their responses to that coronial. I hope they approach it having reflected and heard some of the contributions in here tonight from members, and having reflected on the coroner's report that we discussed yesterday in this parliament. Because whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, those 683 pages of the coronial inquest into Kumanjayi Walker, Madam Speaker, they are testimony of lived experiences, of pain, of truth, and of reform. And that is absolutely important for us to reflect on and to build on and to work on. Madam Speaker, in my closing remarks, I do want to take the opportunity again to just remind everyone in this parliament, not everyone has the luxuries that you will all go home to tonight. And I am included in that. Not everyone in the Northern Territory goes home to a physical house every night, a bed, a fridge full of food, a loving family. Until we address abject poverty across the Northern Territory, we will absolutely continue to feel the effects of crime and antisocial behaviour. And that is something that is not responsible of the government. It's responsibility of all of us to work and to champion on a territory level, on a local level, and on a federal level to improve the living conditions for everybody across the Northern Territory. I want to absolutely, Madam Speaker, acknowledge all of the remote communities and encourage members who have not yet had the opportunity to get out into the beautiful bush to do so. And if you ever want to come to 𝙍𝙖𝙈𝙖𝙑, I will gladly meet you and I will gladly take you out and introduce you to the amazing people who call 𝙍𝙖𝙑 home, because they're pretty special. And if ever we are in situations where we see the loss of a territory life, there is an opportunity in our culture to express condolence, to go to a sorry camp, to talk to family, and to express that. And that's incredibly important, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I thank everyone. This is an important motion. It sets out there the key parts. Certainly, there will be more to say on this as time goes on. But, Madam Speaker, I just want to acknowledge and thank everyone who has done the work. And again, I want to just acknowledge the Kumanjayi Never Again movement, who has been incredibly strong and resilient. I want to absolutely again acknowledge all those people in the Northern Territory Police Force who do a good job, who do work every day alongside First Nations Territorians. And I want to give a shout out to all of my brothers and sisters who are the Aboriginal liaison officers or the community police officers in their remote communities, who've had to work in a difficult climate for some time as we've navigated the pathways and the processes of the coronial inquest. Because they've had a difficult job, Madam Speaker. And I think it's important to acknowledge that work. The Minister for Local Government and Aboriginal Affairs, a great opportunity is before you to get out to Yuendumu and meet with them. You talk about local government reform. The coroner's given you the ideal place to start that, Yuendumu. There are 16 skin groups in Yuendumu. Each skin group recognises and represents the strength and the resilience of our continued culture. It is absolutely imperative that we keep that culture alive. It governs us, it sustains us, and it will help us all, black and white, into the future. Because when our culture is strong, our people are strong. And that's what we all must remember. Madam Speaker, I commend the motion and ask that the motion be put.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I think the noes have it.
Division, please.
Division. A division is called. Please ring the bells. Beg your pardon? Oh, support for the division, please. Yeah. Thank you. The outcome of the division is 7 ayes and 16 noes. The motion has not been agreed to.